Hello and welcome to my easy to understand guide to GQ magazine, which is a set text for component 1, section A of the GCSE Media Studies exam. If GQ magazine comes up in the GCSE exam, it will either be as a media language question where you will have to analyse particular elements of the magazine front cover, or you will get it as a representation question where you will be asked to compare the representations in the GQ front cover with another magazine that the exam board will provide for you in the exam. First of all, the masthead, which is the title of the magazine, is GQ. And as you can see from just underneath the masthead, you will see it stands for Gentleman's Quarterly. GQ magazine used to be called Gentleman's Quarterly, but changed and shortened its name to GQ many years ago and has stayed that way. But it does mean that it is clear from that masthead that it is aimed at men. And the word gentleman also has connotations of being quite high class as well. So it might suggest that the target audience for the magazine is maybe middle class or people who aspire to be quite classy and formal. There's a very large emphasis on masculinity on this front cover. The strapline itself for the magazine says mind, body, and masculinity. So it's very clear that the magazine is going to be really focused on what it is to be a man. There are other cover lines mentioned as well. So, for example, it says man up and then how to be a man in 2016. So all of this kind of suggests that GQ magazine is telling the reader what it is to be a man. And the fact that it says how to be a man suggests that there are very specific rules or instructions that somebody has to follow to be a man. That basically suggests to readers that there are limitations on what men should and shouldn't do and how they should and shouldn't act. Because this image is a kind of close-up shot of Dwayne Johnson with his muscular arm in the foreground, and there's lots of mentions of the word body on the front cover, we do get the impression that physical strength is really important for a man. The close-up shot of him with the arm in the foreground really emphasises his muscles, and the choice of Dwayne Johnson anyway, being a former wrestler and being the star of many action movies, with his muscular physique being one of the most famous parts about him, really does suggest that muscular bodies and overtly muscular bodies, over the top, very exaggerated, hyperbolic bodies, are what men should aim to have. There's quite an interesting key word that you could use here. It's called spornosexual. Spornosexual is one word. It's nothing to do with sexuality. What it is it means somebody, a spornosexual is somebody who is obsessed with the idea of getting a very muscular body, working out at the gym and having a very overtly large body shape in terms of muscles and abs and arms. So looking at this front cover, and indeed looking at loads of other GQ front covers, they are clearly trying to appeal to men who do want that quite muscular body shape. The colour palette used on the magazine is red, black and white, and these are quite masculine colours in general. We think of red and black being quite powerful masculine colours, and so they do connote power and strength. Dwayne Johnson is making direct eye contact with the audience, and it's this direct gaze that draws in the reader and helps them to feel kind of close to him and the magazine. It engages them when they see the magazine in the shop. It's got a very serious facial expression, and that combined with this direct gaze from him makes him seem very serious, quite stern, lacking emotions. And that's one of the stereotypes we often have of men and masculinity that we see in the media, this idea that men should control their emotions and be quite reserved and restrained in terms of, not crying, not laughing, and just being quite serious. So quite reflective of these old-fashioned stereotypes of men and masculinity. And that's emphasised by that phrase, man up. You might have heard that phrase before. Often if somebody says man up, it's this imperative instruction to tell somebody to stop being so emotional and to calm down. So sometimes this phrase has now become associated with this idea of masculinity and men being quite reserved and unemotional. Dwayne Johnson's nickname, The Rock, is in really large lettering on that front cover as the main cover line. A lot of audiences would be familiar with his nickname, so it's a good way of drawing people in. The use of celebrities on front covers is very conventional, particularly on lifestyle magazines. It helps to sell the magazine to the audience. Of course, the nickname The Rock has connotations of strength and power and immovability, which links into that representation of masculinity as well. The fact that they choose to use his nickname in such large letters might suggest that they're more concerned with his star persona and his celebrity and what he looks like than actually who he is beneath that surface. We get the idea that status and wealth is quite important too from the other cover lines. It talks about, £300 beach watches and buying the latest gadgets. So there is a suggestion that buying things is important, reflecting that kind of current social context of consumerism being something that people should want. And it also suggests that wealth and status is something that men should aspire to have. This is backed up by part of Dwayne Johnson's cover line, which talks about him being one of the world's most bankable stars. It suggests that the fact that he's worth a lot of money and can command large salaries in Hollywood is something that we should be impressed by. The price tag of £300 beach watches might also communicate the idea that the target audience for this magazine are going to be reasonably wealthy people, because they are going to be the kind of people who might think about spending £300 on a watch just for the beach. There is a more political story mentioned, which is the Viola Beach tragedy. And the fact that this article is included as a cover line on the front cover might suggest that there is going to be some harder political or current affairs based content in the magazine, and that perhaps some of the magazine is going to be a little bit more serious. Also might suggest that the target audience might be interested in more political affairs as well. The cover lines on the front of this magazine, like on most magazines, act as enigma codes. They are there to tease the audience and to make them want to read more. So the wording is designed to feel exciting. You get the use of exclamation marks. You get things that sound exciting or controversial or interesting. And the idea is that audiences read these cover lines and it starts to get them thinking about what the narratives inside the magazine are going to be about. And so those cover lines are like mini adverts designed to draw in the reader and make them buy the magazine and then read the full articles inside. It's worth, as well as thinking about gender, it's also worth having a think about ethnicity and race as well. We are living in a kind of reasonably contemporary social, cultural context within Britain at the moment where actually there are still some issues with diversity in the media. There is an underrepresentation of people from minority ethnic backgrounds, in particular in the magazine industry. Many magazines fail to represent anyone from minority backgrounds at all. So it might be seen that it's quite unusual to have somebody from an ethnic minority background on the front cover. If you don't know, Dwayne Johnson is mixed race. One of his parents is Black Canadian. One of his parents is Samoan. He himself has born and lived in both America and Canada as well. So he's really from quite a mixed background. And so their choice to include him as the cover star on the magazine, it might be that they're trying to represent the magazine as being more inclusive. Maybe they're trying to tackle diversity and to try and include more minorities within their magazine. And maybe they're trying to make their audience think that they are diverse by including Dwayne Johnson on the front cover. However, some people argue that Dwayne Johnson's ethnicity isn't clear, and a lot of people actually presume that he is white and just particularly tanned. It may be that you could argue that the reason Dwayne Johnson has become so successful in Hollywood is because a lot of people don't necessarily realise what his ethnicity is. You might notice that on Dwayne Johnson's arm he has a tattoo of a bull, and actually the font of The Rock, the exclamation mark font, has been designed so that there is a tiny bull's head at the bottom of the exclamation mark as well. So this kind of symbol of the bull is evident in two places on the front cover. We often associate bulls with aggression and strength and being wild, and so perhaps they're representing Dwayne Johnson in that way as well. If you think back to other set products that you may have studied at GCSE, like the Quality Street advert, the kind of gender stereotypes we used to have many years ago were really quite old fashioned, with men often being shown as the kind of physically strong hero, not having any emotions at all, and just being very wealthy and working hard and going out and supporting the family. But actually, as time has gone on, we have opened up a little bit more diversity in terms of how men are represented in the media. And I'm not saying it's really varied and different now, because we still get those gender stereotypes in the media even now. But we have started to accept that men don't have to be wealthy. We have started to accept that men don't have to be really physically strong and muscular. There are media products that show men as more emotional now. Crying as a man has become more acceptable, when actually in the media products in the past it just really was never shown. So we're getting more representations of men being allowed to be more than just that old-fashioned, serious stereotype. But this magazine shows that quite old fashioned, serious stereotype. So the magazine doesn't necessarily reflect current social and cultural ideas about gender in Britain. And perhaps this is because it's aimed at a male target audience who might aspire to be like Dwayne Johnson, see him as a bit of a role model. And perhaps it's because even though some of those ideas about gender are starting to become more socially acceptable, they are still seen as being a bit alternative and different. And the mainstream ideologies of masculinity are still about physical strength. You need to be prepared to pick out some of those elements in the exam if asked. So you need to be able to talk about things like why they've used those colours, or what the facial expression connotes, or why those cover lines, how they might engage an audience, for example. If you get GQ as a representation question, you need to be thinking about the way he has been represented, whether that is in terms of his gender or his ethnicity, and how that might compare to another magazine. So it's worth having a look at some other magazine front covers and seeing if you can do some comparisons in practice for the GCSE exam.